what I love particularly with your career is it's not been linear. We were talking earlier around squiggly careers. And with yours, I would define it as a squiggly career, but how would you define a squiggly career?
It's when ambition stops asking for permission.
Ooh, I love that.
I think it's when you're not settling. I think
Mhm.
that's really important.
Hello, and welcome to the Plum Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. On today's episode, I'm joined by Kiran Ganu, personal and corporate employer brand expert, helping companies to get closer to their consumer brand through their people. We discuss her career. As she didn't fit the mold, she became the blueprint. Hey.
Hello.
Welcome to our podcast, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, firstly, we were having a conversation earlier, and you have incredible stories to share, and I really want our people to get to know more about you. So, I've got one question to start with you today, and the question is, was HR part of the plan, or did this happen by chance?
No, but it paid for my extensive shoe collection.
They actually need their own moment. This episode for today, when we were talking earlier, they are stunning. The tigers.
Gucci, 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 darling.
Yeah, we'll have to chat about those more afterwards. And for today, what I really want to focus on is all about you, your story, because it's very inspiring and it's the non-traditional linear progression that I think a lot of people are fearful of. And I'm so excited to really get into it. So tell me about where you started.
Started my career working in recruitment and working in recruitment in the day of actually picking up the phone and cold calling. There was no professional social media at that point. LinkedIn hadn't taken off. People were still receiving CVs via fax machine. People were emailing. It was a very, very different time. And I saw it as a peak opportunity to work whilst I was studying and doing my degree. And it allowed me the opportunity to study, make loads of money. And when I graduated, I wasn't going to be in a graduate salary with the rest of my peers. I was able to be their boss because I didn't want to be a sheep.
Love that. And my dad actually drilled that into me when I was younger. And he said, why be a sheep when you can be a shepherd? And I think that's a perfect example with yours. You're learning new skills. You're getting ahead of the curve. Why be like everyone else when you can be better, in my opinion? How did that help you then with landing your first role after that?
It helped me in the sense that I realised I was a product of my environment. I'm from Essex. We're natural born salespeople. We are full of charisma, right? And it allowed me the opportunity to really sort of engage with people in a different way. You know, like I said, it wasn't the case of it was just handed to you. You had to do a lot of sales, a lot of, building up that Rolodex, which existed back then. People don't use Rolodexes anymore. But it allowed me the opportunity to speak to people, to open new doors for me, new avenues, and people from different walks of life. So I could then learn different cultures, how people interact, and the best way to sell to somebody.
I can only imagine, correct me if I'm wrong here, the skills that you learned then, and you saying from Essex, you got that sales running through your blood. I bet that's helped you quite a lot, even to today, where you are in your role.
It did. I got headhunted by LinkedIn when it was in its infancy. So I was, luckily one of their core hires in London. And my job was to explain what LinkedIn was.
How did you explain what it was?
I traveled 90% of the time. And I work with all of their key clients who I have now since worked for because they know of my ability and what I'm able to do. It was during the time where we're trying to establish that job boards were no longer going to be the norm. It was about creating personal connection, building a personal brand and a corporate brand and aligning that to an employer brand. A lot of people didn't really understand that at the time. They were really reliant on, CV searching and job hunting and monster.com and Indeed and Reed, for example. Those days are long gone for certain types of roles. And now you really have to sell your organization, the what's in it for me, and that's the employer brand. But the people that you work for ultimately are your best ambassadors. And that's where the connection really lags for a lot of people. So for me, it was creating that connection with the people. That opportunity, led me to also get to meet Barack Obama when he was president of the United States. And that was during one of the first recessions in 2008 as well, since post then it was very difficult for people to get back into work. And that was what the subject matter was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a opportunity that I don't take lightly. I'm very grateful for, but that really helped me peak and realize the potential where my career could go.
Lost for words, firstly, that is also a moment that not a lot of people will be able to share.
And he complimented me on my shoes. I literally died right there and then. I was in shock, and it was
What were
me
you wearing
filmed.
at the time?
Oh my God, I wore these Christian Louboutins. Back then, they had the spikes on the shoes. They were really well known.
I've got them in my head. I know exactly what you're talking about.
They
Yeah.
were good shoes.
No wonder he said he liked them.
I know. I literally, that was like the best compliment I could ever get from the president. Like, wow.
And also, it's like, okay, where do I go from here? Every time now I'm going to wear these shoes, I'm going to talk about my experience and how working with LinkedIn to where I am now and the people that I'm meeting and talking about personal brand. I can imagine that also just opened so many doors then for your career, because that, from when the conversations we've been having earlier, that's quite early in your career to where you are now.
It was, I also got the opportunity to work with Unilever, right?
Mm.
And they created a role for me there. I was never interviewed for that role. They hired me through a phone call.
Tell me more. I need to know, how did they find you?
LinkedIn referred me.
Did they?
And I think that was the telling part of creating great relationships and showing what you can achieve. Through my experiences with LinkedIn, I worked in across 10 different industries.
Right.
So typically when you see somebody, they can be pigeonholed into a role. If you've worked in financial services, you'll find that quite often enough it will happen to you.
Mhm.
They will only choose people from those. But if you're going to work in employer branding and recruiter marketing, you should have the aptitude and the skill to do a number of employer brands, a number of industries. It makes you more versatile,
Mhm.
but it makes your experiences more interesting. And I think that what has allowed me to become a career architect in that sense, working with different brands, but then also being able to see what I can achieve in a succinct amount of time
Mhm.
and the ROI you can get from that. That's what people want. At the end of the day, that's what they're sort of targeted on.
And you do position yourself as a strategic career architect. What does that actually mean?
So being a strategic career architect isn't sort of like floating in theory, but it's building from the ground up. At Unilever, I was very fortunate to report into an absolute powerhouse. She is now the CEO of Chanel, an Indian woman leading a French brand. And that kind of leadership really taught me how to create space for myself, but also others.
It also goes to show that you've been intentional with your career as well. It's not chaotic. It's strategically intentional with where you've been based on your experience, just like what you've explained with previous leaders who've then shaped you. And I can only assume that's made you want more in your career.
I've been very thoughtful about the places I've gone to, right?
Mhm.
I can't sell something that's shit.
True.
So if I believe in that brand from a customer point of view and I can see the value in it, it makes it very easy for me to sort of share and emulate that love for that brand. A lot of the work that you do, especially in personal and employer branding, is advocating for that brand, not just externally, but internally as well.
Mhm.
So if people aren't vibing with you internally, they can't see you're passionate and you can't reignite that spark in them, the spark that made them decide to work for that employer, there's an absolute fail. At the same point, for example, if you think about, let's say, a big brand like I just spoke about, Unilever, every single human owns over 10 Unilever products in the home without realizing it. When you start creating an affinity to a brand,
Mhm.
right, and you start hearing the stories of the people behind that brand, you feel very proud to purchase a particular product from them.
And when a company doesn't have an employer brand, they're missing out in so much potential. You were just saying then around working for a brand that you feel aligned to, you feel connected, they've got a strong vision, mission that you understand as an external partner, and you want to be part of that journey. That's what makes you drawn to that company.
Absolutely. I'm working with Flow at the moment, Flow Health app, and, 1 in every 4 women at the age of 18 to 44 use Flow in the USA. It's huge,
It is huge.
right?
And it's also a household name for flow. A lot of women have heard of flow or they're using flow in practice, which is a testament to the company.
Absolutely. But they've got a very strong mission,
Mhm.
got very strong values. And I think with that, when somebody, and I shared it with my colleagues recently, I wore a Flow branded jumper and I was in my local Waitrose. And I've never been stopped by so many people telling me about their reproductive health. From the lady at the deli counter, person selling me meat at the butcher's, to I'm picking up my oat milk, people are telling me how it's helped them, sort of plan for, baby, help them with understanding perimenopause, the menopause, and those transitions in life. And it's that affinity with the brand. So they're always going to advocate for you. And that's really important. So if you have a strong mission, you have strong values, then people are always going to be very interested in engaging with you. And it's turning that customer into a candidate to then an employee.
And that builds on the connection
Mhm.
internally as well. If people are connected and bought into the brand, they feel more connected to where the company is going. And if they're on that growth phase, they want to be part of the journey. And equally, from an external candidate perspective, if they're connected to the mission, they want to get in as soon as they can. Even if it's an industry that they've not worked in before, we can all have aspirations. And what I love, particularly with your career, is it's not been linear. We were talking earlier around squiggly careers. And with yours, I would define it as a squiggly career, but how would you define a squiggly career?
It's when ambition stops asking for permission.
Ooh, I love that.
I think it's when you're not settling. I think that's really important. I look at things in a very different way. I'm in a different cycle of my life, my fourth decade, right? And I'm also a mother too. And as your child gets older, you think about your purpose compass and your values and finding things that align to your values. And what I found is when you're restricted to a permanent position in a lot of companies, you don't have the freedom to ask, especially as a woman, can I drop my kid off to school? Can I pick them up? I need to do the school run, especially when you're a senior leader. It feels icky, sort of to ask your boss that, who's probably a VP or a CEO of an organization. Is that all right? And so you have the freedom to carve out a career for yourself, but you also have the opportunity to work with a number of brands. And I take roles that are project based for that reason. I think once you're able to go into an organization, show your credibility, actually deliver on what they need and more,
Yes.
they remember you for that. And they will refer you on to other organizations too. But that also makes your experience incredibly versatile. I couldn't think of anything worse to do what I do and stay in a company and do their employer brand and then revisit it in another 2 years when their culture changes and revisit. I think once you have done it quite a few times, it makes you more appealing. And in my career, I've won over 50 awards in employer branding and DEI. I wouldn't have done that in one company.
That's incredible. Huge testament to the work that you're doing. With the point around squiggly careers, have you ever felt the pressure of potentially being considered more of like job hopping?
No. And that's because I've been able to prove what I've done in every single organization I've worked in. I'm very metric driven. And I think a lot of companies can see that when I have that conversation with them, and a lot of the time they're hiring a permanent person for that role. And I said, but once they've done all of this, what do they do next? And they're like, I don't know, I have to figure it out kind of thing. And so you don't actually need somebody in a permanent position doing this. They can build the foundation and the infrastructure for you and lead. And you just need somebody just to maintain. It's not best use of my time. I'm probably not a great salesperson in that respect, but I also get the client at the same time, which is great. I think, where I am at my career and what I've seen from a DEI perspective, it's very difficult for a lot of women of color to see themselves sort of attain great heights. For a lot of white women, there is a glass ceiling to see what's attainable, right? In terms of where can your career path go? But for a lot of brown and black women, we don't see that. It's a concrete ceiling. It's because we don't have that much visibility of other leaders in that space that we can look up to. And so for me, I've always made a point of, even though I'm autistic and neurodiverse, and public speaking is not something that I warm to because, I'm uncensored and unfiltered. And luckily you told me I could swear on this podcast. That's fantastic.
Be yourself. That's what we love the most.
So I said, I was like, I'll do this so I can be myself and crack my jokes. But I think it's really important because a lot of people will look up to me. And I know that I have to do this. I'm doing a disservice to the people that are in my community as well. And so for me, speaking publicly about these issues where we're socially programmed as women of color or people of color to say, hey, be quiet, just get on with it, keep your head down. And that's what our parents have told us. It's what they've grown up with, especially parents that have come into our country as well as immigrants, you know?
And also, we're told stay in the job, stay in the company. If it's good and you're happy, stay within there. I also find that moving jobs and having that squiggly career sometimes isn't always in the best regard. And it's frustrating to see because I think there's also such value in moving companies and adding value into those. When you were talking earlier around being a strategic career architect, how can we start to adopt that mindset like what you have around careers? Because some people are still super linear and really traditional. And I personally think that's really outdated. But how can we get our mindset to that?
I didn't fit the mold, so I became the blueprint. I started to look back at sort of how I was baked into societal norms, right? You watch Disney movies, you expect your Prince Charming, you are in a relationship for 2 years and you expect an engagement ring, and then you expect to get married 2 years after that and expect to have a baby and expect to then have a house and a mortgage. You know, we have these ideas programmed into our minds. But then if you align that to how the industry has moved, right? New companies are continually popping up. New skills are popping up. You asked me at the beginning of the podcast, you know, do I see myself in my career in HR? I did an HR degree. But what I actually do now didn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So it was a skill of a new form. AI didn't come about until, you know, a few years ago. You know, when I was working, you know, in other companies like Bumble, for example, or Unilever or LinkedIn, there was no chat GPT, right? There was none of that, right? And so I think a lot of people need to kind of move along with the time. So when they see somebody with a squiggly career or somebody that's had an unconventional pathway, they should really look at the culture ads,
Mm-hmm.
not the culture fit. The culture ad, what can they give us that we do not have? And if somebody's done project-based work, especially somebody who's a mum or a parent, it's understanding we're very good at our time.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone into a lot of organizations, and one thing that I've advocated for is teaching the future leaders of tomorrow, right? Getting them to work with me. I'm neurodiverse, and understanding the skill set that I have is something that they would traditionally walk away from, right? Being neurodiverse and having Asperger's means that I'm very good with numbers. I'm very good with data, but I'm very fast. Also won't bullshit you because I'm not wired to lie because I can't lie, right? And I think that's incredibly important. You need more people like that in an HR team.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't that. What you do have is a lot of paper pushers.
Yes, cannot disagree with you on that. And we need to open up our mindset as well, and also to the reality of the current workforce, but also the future. So when you're going in and you're supporting managers around the future of tomorrow, what response do you get from them when you coach and enable them?
Well, I usually have to show them some proof points first with data, but I usually find that by giving them that data, they feel more confident in moving forward. But it's also a lot of hand holding,
Yeah.
right? And it's explaining them to a way that they can also explain to their bosses and their peers. This is the direction we're moving in. So they feel comfortable because when they have to report to the board,
Mm-hmm.
it's important and they're able to articulate the vision very clearly. But it's the same when you're any leader. When you have a team working under you, you have to articulate a vision very clearly so you know what they're working towards. If they're not motivated.
Couldn't agree more. And it goes back to if they're not motivated, they're not connected to the brand. More often than not, we'll see the ripple effect in retention, engagement, performance, all sorts, which is why it's so fundamental not to judge, I think, people throughout their careers. We are taught, and it's instilled within us, that if you zigzag in your career, that's wrong. And I completely disagree with it. I think more of us should have squiggly careers. And statistically, 45% of Gen Z will switch industries during their career. And that's the reality of the modern workforce. Yet I don't think managers are fully there with accepting how much value we can bring by bringing somebody into the company who doesn't have that traditional pathway.
But those managers that can't see that are the ones that have been sat there for like 5, 10 years. They're not rotated. And often enough, it's leaders like me can't get into those organizations because for my sort of level of experience and job level, unless someone retires or dies, that job doesn't exist. And if I don't look like the norm
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at cultural fit, that happens a lot for a lot of, people of color as well, then you are not considered. Amount of times that I've, put a CV forward, for example, for a job or, you know, waited for an application that sometimes when they haven't engaged with me or had a conversation, I'll be asked a fair few microaggressions. Can you speak English? Do you have a visa? Are you able to work in the UK? And the minute they speak to me or they realize another thing is, I've got a very masculine name, so a lot of companies will use ATSs that have AI baked in them and don't even look at applications, right? And so they will look at my name and discard me thinking that I'm a man if they have a diversity quota for attracting women. So there are a lot of interesting things happening in organizations when you look at how people are then qualified for a particular position. But those people that have been there for a long amount of time don't have a realistic viewpoint of the world. And I say that because I've gone into those organizations, had to create their employer brand and had to talk to them about their attrition data and say, look, people are moving, transitioning, but you need to ask them what attracts them to a job. So for example, when I go into a company and I look at their job adverts and what they're asking of people, so you don't even have persona profiles. If you're asking somebody for 10 years of experience, you have to make assumptions of where they are at in their lives. So you have to talk to them about where they're at. So if somebody, for example, is 10 years in their career and you want to attract more people from a certain demographic, and they could be parents or carers, you should be talking about flexible hybrid working. You should put that at the top of your profile. You should talk to them in a conversational manner because they may have just come across your job ad in passing. This may suit somebody that likes to do the school run. And we work, sort of globally. So our team turn up at this time. And if you're talking to Gen Z, they really take pride in their personal life. They do understand work-life balance. It's very different for a lot of people that are my age demographic and older because we weren't sort of programmed to think about that in that way. We didn't really have social media, to that sort of effect. And so I think that's why, those considerations need to be made. But unless you're moving with the times and you're looking at people's squiggly careers and you have people's squiggly careers, you're not going to have that information.
No, and it also comes back down to the education. When you go in and you support clients around the DEI piece in particular, opening up their eyes. Because you're absolutely right. More often than not, they've been sat in that seat for a very, very long time. They've done what they have done for the last few years, and they've not been progressive. They've not been open. And I can only imagine they've then lost a lot of great talent as a result of that. Talking about your DEI background and expertise, how do you support clients to overcome their internal strategies where they are getting friction with talent attraction, just like what you gave the example with your name, with it being regarded on an ATS more masculine and then being disregarded? How have you helped companies to overcome that?
Well, a lot of them ask them, what's your street viewpoint in terms of where you want to get to? If you're a startup planning to IPO, then you need to start thinking about your S1, right? And you need to showcase how you attract diverse talent. At the same time, you need to create a culture of belonging. So it's looking at what communities have you got? Do you have ERGs? So when you're looking at different demographics of people that work there, are you supporting them? Because they spend most of their life working for you, right? Do they have community internally? Do they know that they're supported by you? Because yes, we know your company values are aligned to your KPIs and your bonus and your performance and so forth. But what's in it for them? That's what an EVP is. What's in it for me? Right? And often enough, they don't have that and they're not tracking it. They're not looking at the biases that exist in their processes. And so it's really taken them on that journey to really understand how people feel. And that's also stripping back and looking at your employee reviews, not just your internal ones, your Glassdoor reviews as well.
They're telling.
They're very telling. And it's very telling because what I then look at is when you segment employee reviews, right? You look at what are they talking about the most and what have they said internally, because everyone feels like it's not anonymous, right? Then you go to Glassdoor and say, for example, we're looking at benefits internally and we look at what they say about the benefits externally. You can often enough tell, do they know what they have access to? Are you doing a good job communicating that internally? And that's where you actually learn a lot more about the organization. You feed that back to them and they're often enough surprised I was like, you need to do a promotional work internally, connect with that community, but you also got to think about your tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
How you speak to your people is incredibly important. How you treat people as well and others around them is very telling. And I think a lot of companies do not get that right.
They definitely don't. And going back to your original point, when you said around when you started out in your career, the traditional HR landscape as it was then, you're doing different now. And within the people sphere, employer brand is on our plate. Comms is definitely on our plate. And I really like when companies cross collaborate for their communication. I don't think one person can be purely responsible for the internal comms. I do think we need to lean on each other for that. But that's definitely something in a more, I guess, maybe a post-COVID era in particular around our communication that we need to be stronger and we need to get better. And I know you're very good at that. We were talking about this off camera and the comms that you're doing. How can we start to build our communication strategies to be clearer within internal companies?
I think comms is a shared responsibility, but it's identifying where it sits.
Mm-hmm.
When I started my early day in employer brand, people didn't know where I sat. And that's why you'd find that most of those roles were contract based
Mm-hmm.
or they were projects, which is what I did, right? It's the same with Unilever. It was a job that was created for me. It did not exist before and they didn't know where it sat. And I co-created their first editorial team there. And that was a mixture of having internal comms, external comms put together so that we could start pivoting in a different way. If a brand was doing something, I wanted to know the backstory and the people behind the brand so I could showcase those stories. And through that, I actually created over 400 people stories that I published on LinkedIn and then placed onto our website, tracked it, and we made over 2,000 hires at Unilever through my content strategy. I used LinkedIn solution called LinkedIn Elevate, and it was showcased at Talent Connect. It was very successful.
Very, very successful.
And it's a case study, so you can go and have a look on their website.
We'll have to pop that in the show notes as well so people can take a look. And it also just goes to show when you're saying that it is more of a collaborative experience, this internal battle that we're seeing at the moment, is it marketing? Is it HR? Where does it fall? Does it matter? Like, as long as we're getting it right and we're being intentional about it, you've just given a perfect example of how it can
It
be
really,
successful.
really matters. And I think it's a hybrid between sitting in HR but having a reporting line into your marketing team.
Mm-hmm.
You're using internal communications to communicate with your people.
Yes.
And it's very aligned to employer brand because there's a tone of voice that you use to communicate with those individuals. But your internal comms team is supposed to be talking about events that are happening, for example, benefits, changes that are going to affect them, for example, in their day-to-day.
Mm-hmm.
And what you often find is when you're looking at Glassdoor reviews, right? A lot of people don't know the benefits that they have.
No.
Yeah, HR think that they do because they see it in the employee reviews, right? There's a massive disconnect there. And this is where, from a data point of view, I look at, did someone read the full newsletter? There are some HR systems that exist that allow, somebody in HR to communicate via that system, and then it will automate an email to the member of the team and also automate a different version of that to maybe some internal communication system like Slack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get different versions of that. But how many of those HR professionals are looking at the data behind that? Did someone click through? Did they go to the HR system? Did they engage with it? Some of them allow you to leave emojis. Did they react to it? And what is the bounce rate if it's hosted on our intranet, for example? Nobody's really looking at that. And you do need different media formats. And that's why I say that even though it should sit in HR, an internal comms department, there should be a dotted line into marketing because there needs to be a way that you can really monetize ROI in that effect.
It's interesting, actually, because there is so much data out there, and I love that that is a focus for you. It's not a focus for all HR professionals. I don't know why it isn't. And if I think of my career, which my career is much more linear than yours, data hadn't been a focus. And I think that's such a missing piece within the space. And I would have been a better professional sooner if I'd have recognized that.
I took Unilever from a 24 best place to work
Mm-hmm.
to 9 in 1 year to then 7.
Wow.
And that's a record that no one has ever broken with Glassdoor to date. No one.
What was the biggest reason for that?
being very strategic, understanding the difference between employee reviews left internally and then looking at your Glassdoor data and really ensuring that people knew what they had access to, that they're feeling listened to and heard by having a very strong internal communication strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then being very mindful about asking people for reviews at pivotal points and high points in their employee experience. So from a interview with a recruiter, right through to you've got the job, right through to you've just passed your probation. These are key points that a lot of people miss out.
Mm-hmm.
And you really need to ensure that you're doing that. At the same time, it's planning when you're doing your employee reviews. When you're asking people to do too much and they don't feel like they're listened to, what you'll often find is only X% of people completed the employee review. And then you'll see HR sending reminders out. Please complete it. Please complete it. Another reminder. It's like, ugh.
I've had that. I had that actually in my last role. Half of the company completed the review, which I think was really telling. And then we were just getting reminders. And I was in the people team at the time. And I was embarrassed, to be honest, that we had to keep reminding people because there was quite clearly a disconnect of why they didn't want to complete it in the first place.
Because they had a crap employee value proposition. The value proposition is the what's in it for me.
Yes.
And if there is nothing in it for me, and I know that you're just going to use this data to try and hoodwink people into coming to the company to work, we've got great employee reviews here, 8 or 9% approval rating, right? People will always go to Glassdoor to find the truth.
Yes.
Right? And you can filter, right?
And the thing with Glassdoor is, unfortunately, people go to it after employment, and that can also feel at a point when they feel quite stuck and potentially they weren't heard during their career, so they feel that they can articulate it there because they didn't have the psychological safety internally. What is one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who is feeling stuck right now?
Carry out your own performance review.
Mm-hmm.
Take a look at what you've achieved. Don't be gaslit by anybody, including your boss or any of your peers. They all have KPIs. They've all got their own agenda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do your own performance review and don't let anyone gaslight you and make you feel less than. You know you've done a good job and you know that someone will appreciate you elsewhere. Go.
Mm-hmm.
Don't sit around and wait. Those opportunities aren't going to find you. I'm a strong believer in what's meant for you won't pass you by. However, if you're directing your energy in the wrong areas, and you're just comfortable, then you're doing a massive disservice to yourself. Huge disservice to yourself. So I think it's really important to leverage those opportunities, network with people, but also have that self-belief in yourself. Take a step back. And that's one thing I do with a lot of people I work with, especially in employer branding. You have to lift everyone's spirits and remind them why they belong, or create an environment so they can belong.
Mm-hmm.
Reminding them why they're there, creating, doing a vibe check. And often enough, you have to do that for yourself. If you don't advocate for yourself, who is going to? When I say about building your personal brand, it's about understanding or knowing what people are going to say when you're not in the room. That's your reputation. That's your personal brand. If no one's advocating for you, then you need to go. You need to be somewhere that you're fully appreciated.
And that can only start with ourselves.
Absolutely. You're not going to blossom in an environment that's dead.
Definitely not. No, honestly, you're talking and I'm just nodding. And if anyone is watching on our YouTube, they will see that I am, because you're absolutely right. We need to be our biggest advocates. During my career, I didn't track any of my performance. And then it came to the end of my corporate, and I've been in that for nearly 10 years. And I thought, okay, I now need to rethink back into my legacy career. If I'd have started tracking my performance and essentially doing my own performance record, as you mentioned, I would have felt better in my career, but also I could have showcased those skills and built my own door. It's not for anyone else to build a door for me. I can do that. It's on my initiative. And you're a perfect example of that within your career.
Thank you.
So, Kieran, just one final question I've got for you, and it may be the point that you mentioned just then, but the question is, looking back on your career, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
I would tell my younger self to audit my energy.
Mm.
And when I say that, it means, understanding what fires you up and what drains you dry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go in environments that are going to dehydrate me.
Rightly
I'm going to
so.
go in environments where I can flourish and I can shine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's understanding that. It's not taking anything to heart as well. You know, you can walk into environments where you shine brighter than other people, and people might feel like you might take away their shine, but it's showing how you can complement one another. And if they can't, then it's not your job to change them. It's not your job to change your mindset or look for that approval. It's keeping that self belief in yourself, which is incredibly important. And if someone knocks you down, don't take it to heart. It's their own self esteem issues.
If someone else knocks you down, that's their problem.
Exactly. It's not your problem. It's just like if someone says something about you behind your back, it's none of your business.
Mm-hmm.
You know what people are saying about you. But what is your business is your personal brand and your reputation and what people say about you when you're not in the room. That should be your biggest advocates. If they are not singing your praises and they are your peers and your boss, it's time to go.
And we'll end on that perfect message at the end. Honestly, thank you so much for sharing. Your career has been very inspirational, and I know a lot of our listeners will take note from that. And there's such key points that you've mentioned within there and actions that we can all take and lessons along the way. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.